And that Shaitan finds his way inside our qulub through simply the attributes that we imbue ourselves with. The characteristics that define your nafs and mine. Positive or negative, in this case the negative sifat and attributes of, for example, as we mentioned, of miserliness and greed, of bukhl, of envy, of hasad, of riya, boastfulness, and of kibr, of arrogance, of being self-impressed, of hate, of anger, of lack of fairness, of love and attachment for dunya, love and attachment for jah, for social status, and so on and so forth. All of those Shaitan simply finds, and when we have those characteristics, we have invited Shaitan inside of our qalb. Inna ibadi, I repeat, says Allah Azza wa Jal, Inna ibadi laysa laka alayhim sultan illa man ittaba'aka min al-ghawin. My ibad, says Allah Azza wa Jal in the meaning of this ayah, you Shaitan have no power over them, no authority over them, except those who go astray. That is their qulub and their anfus and their nufus and their selves are not balanced. And Allah Azza wa Jal gave the authority to Shaitan to suggest, to try. And Allah Azza wa Jal says, أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِكَافٍ عَبْدَهُ, which means, as a form of a question, but it means affirmation. Isn't Allah sufficient for His abd? And observe here in this ayah, my brothers and sisters, the connection between ibadah and kifayah. أليس الله بكاف عبده كلما ازداد المرء في عبادته وعبوديته كلما ازدادت كفاية الله إياه وكلما نقص العبد في عبادته وعبوديته كلما نقصت كفاية الله حيث إذا لا عبادة لا كفاية. So that means Allah is saying, I am sufficient for those who are ibad. The ayah therefore implies if there is ibadah, there is sufficiency. The ayah therefore implies the more ibadah, the more sufficiency. The ayah therefore implies the less ibadah, the less sufficiency. And sufficiency from what and whom? What is the eternal, or the not eternal, the long-lasting enemy of ourselves? Ash-Shaitan, after the very nafs of ours that is within us. And that we have established that Shaitan comes into our qulub by the very attributes that we choose to have. In other words, cultivating the lower three states of the self implies inviting Shaitan into ourselves, and therefore we have imbued ourselves with akhlaq that are not divine. And when we speak of morals, could a person who is an atheist have good morals? Could a person who is an atheist do good things? The answer is yes, sometimes. But the question is for what? What's the point? Because a person who does not believe in God, what is moral becomes relative for him or her. What makes him or her feel good and satisfied, then that becomes good, and that becomes khuluqun hasan. In other words, if my interests, however I define them, do not lead me to the conclusion that this is hasan or this is qabih. If this is hasan, if they don't lead me to this is hasan, I'm not going to commit that action or go through that conduct. But is al-khuluq a matter of what I think or what the creator of the human being establishes? It is well established in our deen that in the presence of divine revelation, the human intellect does not independently determine al-husn wal-qubh independently from revelation. does not determine what is beautiful, jazakallahu khairan, and what is ugly independently from divine revelation. And therefore, an atheist could do an act in its external image that is acceptable and lawful and maybe moral, in the English word of moral, but that is not necessarily khuluqun hasan in the divine balance. Many times, and as Muslims we are seeing this, and we have seen it before, of course, in human history, where even Muslims influenced by other choices of life, if you will, by other philosophies of life, they also espoused the philosophy that I, as a human being, can determine what is hasan, what is qabih, independently from shara'. And any person who believes that is, we have to say, and that is in our deen a fact, that is a statement of kufr, that is an act of kufr. I do not independently underline from shara' determining that this is khuluqun hasan and this is khuluqun qabih. Because then akhlaq are actually no akhlaq. Because what is hasan for you is not necessarily hasan for me or for someone else. What is qabih for you or ugly for you or detrimental for you is not necessarily so for me or for someone else. And then you have moral relativism. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke of times to come when that will happen. And everyone will be impressed by his or her views, says Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I become the source of what is right and wrong. Not only the concern for what is right and wrong, but the source of what is right and wrong. My sympathies and antipathies determine what is right, what is wrong, what is moral, what is immoral, what is hasan and what is qabih. Yet, we have been finding out in our deen that that is not the case. And when those doors, I come back to those doors, when they are open to shaitan, shaitan comes in the qalb and operates. And especially, the less we are in a state of dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal, again, the more control shaitan has over our hearts. And because Allah says so. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says so. اقرأوا إن شئتم قوله تعالى. Besides what I have mentioned to you, the ayah that I recited a few moments ago, وَمَنْ يَعْشُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ الرَّحْمَنِ, remember? Allah Azza wa Jalla says also, استحوذ عليهم الشيطان فأنساهم ذكر الله. Which means shaitan overwhelmed them and took them over and made them forget the dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal. What does this mean? If I am not in the dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal, if I'm often forgetful of the dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal, that implies shaitan and my nafs, the lower nafs, have more control of me.